In 2012, archaeologists at a site in Jamestown, Virginia, made a startling discovery. A human skeleton was found belonging to a girl around the age of 14, buried in a pit from within the original Jamestown fort. Her bones were mixed in with other animal bones like cows and horses, all of which would have been eaten, so it was likely a garbage pit. After more investigation, they found that the girl's skeletal remains, including a skull, her lower jaw, and leg bone, all had peculiar marks on them that appeared to be made from an axe or cleaver and a knife. Based on this evidence, archaeologists came to the conclusion that this was evidence of cannibalism. Although we have letters and diaries that speculated this discovery marked the first case of physical evidence to support that cannibalism had occurred in Jamestown, the first permanent English colony in North America. Just 4 years into its settlement, the colony would be devastated, starved, and only 20% of the colonists would remain alive. They turned to cannibalism to survive. But how did things get so bad? Jamestown was founded in May of 1607. 104 settlers originally arrived to set up their new town. They were all men and mostly soldiers and labourers who could build buildings and protect the settlement. They constructed a wooden fort around a new wooden houses and storehouse and a church. Where they settled was surrounded by a marshy bog, and they later discovered that the wells within the fort collected salty water instead of fresh. Almost immediately, it was apparent that they were in trouble. The main goal of the colony was to find gold. The financial support in setting up and maintaining the colony relied on finding gold, or at least some valuable resource of some kind, so that the investors could profit from their venture. So time was split between actually setting up the colony and scouting and mapping out the area. Of course, it seemed like they may have forgotten the most important part of a new colony, the creation of a sustainable food source. The food and resources they had brought would not last up until winter, and yet they didn't have the expertise to set up farming and food crops grown and harvested before winter arrived. The region was unfamiliar to the Europeans, and they had picked a particularly marshy area for their farming. And on top of this, the region was experiencing severe drought that year. One Captain John Smith, yes, the one who inspired Pocahontas' love interest, was a part of this first settlement. He was important in establishing trade with the local Native American tribes, who, opposed to how they are often depicted, were actually already familiar in dealing with the nosy and arrogant Europeans traipsing over their land. The natives actually greeted these new settlers by saying hello, and immediately expressed interest in getting them to trade man-made goods for their expertise, and most importantly, food. Now, these settlers did not take care to store their food well, and didn't take advice from the Native American farmers, so as winter hit, they were in real trouble. They starved, and on top of that, malaria spread quickly. After just 1 year at Jamestown, only 38 people remained from the original 104. At this point, desperate, the settlers resorted to stealing food from the nearby Powhatan tribe, pretty much ruining the relationship with their only source of help. Thankfully, more ships of supplies were expected, surely bringing more food with them. A total of 6 supply shipments came during 1608 and 1609. But apparently, supply meant more people, and those people, around 300, had eaten their fair share of provisions on the way to the colony. Actually, most of the food meant for the colony was on another ship, called the Sea Venture, which rather ironically was the one ship lost at sea in a storm. The winter of 1609 and 1610 came to be known as the Starving Time. Food was so scarce that colonists began to eat everything: their horses, cats, rats, even shoe leather. This, of course, not depicted in Disney's 1995 hit Pocahontas, but oddly accurate was that John Smith did have an accident for which he returned to England for treatment in October of 1609, and likely just let everyone know how desperate they were for food. Also, quite historically on the nose are the settlers' aggressive relations with the Powhatan Empire and their chief Powhatan, but that's about it. Of the around 400 settlers, only 61 survived to see 1611, and still a ship had not arrived. With the investors getting nervous about the lack of profits coming back to them, many pulled out of the scheme, and they had a hard time gathering up the support to send over even more supplies. George Percy was the governor of Jamestown at the time, and decades later, in 1625, he recalled that once they had gotten through the horses and the rats, the situation was desperate, and thoughts turned to cannibalism. If you're squeamish, I'd skip to about 30 seconds ahead. He wrote, "Nothing was spared to maintain life, and to do those things which seemed incredible, as to dig up dead corpses out of graves and to eat them, and some have licked up the blood which had fallen from their weaker fellows." In addition to Percy's, 5 other accounts also refer to cannibalism at Jamestown during that time. Apparently, one man was executed for slaughtering his pregnant wife, storing her, and salting her flesh to eat later. So many corroborated this story, and yet for the longest time, archaeological investigations had never found evidence of cannibalism. That is until 2012, when the human skeleton dubbed Jane was found. Along with the cutting marks, there is no evidence that she was murdered, so it is likely that, just as George Percy described, she was dug up from her grave after already having died. They have been able to reconstruct what the girl may have looked like and can speculate quite a lot based on her bones. They believe she was a settler who arrived in one of the several ships from 1609, as not many women were brought to Jamestown, so she would have either been a maidservant or a wealthy gentleman's daughter, perhaps someone who invested in the colony. According to her bones, she did have high-protein diet, which points to upper class, but they also show a low lead level, which, considering that the rich ate from pewter dishes containing lead, perhaps shows that she was their maid. Even more incredibly, they can look at her teeth and determine that she was likely from the southern coast of England, simply based on the water that she consumed while she was growing up. And they can tell that she ate a mostly European diet, so she had not been in Jamestown long before her death. It's almost unnerving that we might know so much about Jane, considering the story her bones are telling us, but Jane is a vital part of our history. But as I said, Jamestown was the first permanent settlement in North America, so how did they get out of this misery? The supply ship, the Sea Venture, who I mentioned earlier, had got lost at sea, had shipwrecked in Bermuda. The settlers had not come prepared to build a new colony, and so their only choice was to take a chance on Jamestown, build themselves a new craft, and head to their original destination. They brought with them most of the supplies that they had rescued and saved the starving colonists of Jamestown. After this miracle, yet another ship arrived from England carrying with it a year's supply of food, probably thanks to the true hero of the story, handsome John Smith. It is safe to say that the early settlement expeditions have plenty of misery and tragedy with them. Jamestown is one of the most well-known settlements, likely because they were the first one to succeed, even after such a brutal start. Roanoke, England's previous and failed attempt at a colony, suffered a mysterious disappearance of their entire population, but that is a story for another day. Thanks for watching. I hope this one wasn't too grim and you weren't just about to eat dinner. Let me know what you think about this settlement attempt. Was it a success or a failure? It is dubbed a success because it eventually came to thrive, but I think Jane would have something to say about that. As always, see you next time.